We're in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, she, her, and hers, and I'm the Senior Partnerships Manager here at AllVoices. Today, I'm very excited to welcome our next guest onto the interview series, Trisch Smith. She is the Global Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer at Edelman. Trisch, thank you so much for being here. If you want to share a little bit about yourself for our listeners, including your pronouns, and when you were younger, do you remember how exactly you answered the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Sure. Well, firstly, thank you so much for having me. As you shared, my name is Trisch Smith, pronouns she and her. I am the Global Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer at Edelman. We are the world's largest public relations communications marketing firm. And I have been with the firm for quite some time. I often say I started when I was 12, but 20 years, and have had an amazing opportunity for growth and development. Led client work for many, many years in the multicultural DEI space, still provide senior counsel for many clients, and help to oversee our global DEI efforts, the first in the capacity within our firm. So it's been quite a journey and an amazing opportunity to sort of chart that course. In terms of, there was a question about what I wanted to be. What was the question about grow up? Yeah. I wanted to be Oprah. I wanted to be Oprah. I was often times in school, oftentimes given the report card that said she's a great student, but she just won't be quiet. So I've always had a knack for communications, I guess, or talking, speaking, enjoying conversation, and having lively discussions. It led me to pursue a degree in communications in undergrad, and then I went on to get my master's degree in broadcast journalism, again with the thought that I would report and or produce the news. Did that for a little bit, doing some freelance things, and then decided to go into the public relations realm. So the other side of it, instead of reporting on the news, being in a position to help clients tell their stories and get in the news, if you will. So that's my journey. But I wanted to be Oprah. She was such an amazing force and still continues to be in the world of communications. And then seeing a woman of color on television. I'm from Maryland, went to undergrad in Baltimore, which is where Oprah got one of her first starts on air. So she's always been a force in my mind and just an amazing example, and demonstrates the importance of seeing diversity, right? Seeing it, because when you see it, you know that it's possible. When you see persons who look like yourself, you can believe that you're able to attain that level of success or some other level desired. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you for sharing your path and a little bit around your story. I love Oprah, and this is one of the reasons why I enjoyed doing this series as well. On a, of course, much smaller scale, but really understanding folks' stories. And I know, 0% of the time when I ask this question, no one's like, I wanted to be a diversity, equity, inclusion practitioner when I was 5 years old. What is your why for being in this work?
Yeah, so my why is really driven by my desire to create places and spaces for people who look like me. I was oftentimes the only one, or a double or triple only in many rooms. The only person of color, the only woman, the youngest woman, or the only person under a certain age. And so, because of that, I wanted to make sure that I was helping to and really being focused on ensuring that we diversified our industry within the comms PR space. We know that it's important to have diversity at the table, particularly in what we do, because it helps us reach diverse audiences, understanding, right, the needs, nuances, mores, language of different communities. How best to convey messages is important, and we need diversity there to do it. So it was because of that, of feeling sometimes like I didn't belong, feeling that I was not included or that I was an afterthought. Those are the reasons that I decided to do this work. And again, I had been on the client side for many years, and so had been a person in the room, was like, I want to do something there. How can I help be a part of that? And in many instances, when you have a good idea, be prepared to help execute against it, right? Or you have something that you point out and you draw attention to, be prepared to be a part of that change. And so that's what I've been able to do.
Absolutely. I think having the ripple effect, especially in this industry as well, in terms of representation, diversity of voices in the room as well, could have a huge impact. what is your unique role as Global Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer, and what is it not at Edelman as well?
So again, because I'm the first to serve in this capacity, we've really worked to sort of build our strategy and determine what makes sense for our firm. We are uh, quite large with more than 60 offices around the globe. So when we even talk about diversity, that means different things in different places. But we're also independently owned. So we're still a family owned company. So that has its own sort of culture, right? And so what is very much a part of our work is how we're working to create a space of belonging for each and every employee, no matter who you are, where you are, what you look like, who you love, language you speak, all of those things, that there is a place in which you feel that you belong and that you have a voice within our organization. It's one thing to say that you're welcoming people in. It's another thing to say that people feel that they feel that they have the opportunity to thrive, not just survive in an organization, right? What are you really doing to transform culture to ensure that people have a level of cultural intelligence or curiosity to learn more. And so that's part of our work each and every day. How are we bringing more diversity into the firm in whatever shape or form? Because diversity is not only what you see, race and ethnicity is hugely important, gender is critically important, but we know there are other characteristics as well. And so being mindful of bringing that diversity into the firm, but ensuring that we're creating teams, we're creating offices within our organization that really do reflect the world in which we live. And that's important. And that also we're then impacting the communities around us. So our work is focused on our colleagues, our clients, and our communities. Those are our core audiences, our colleagues being first and foremost. But how are we doing work each day that helps to drive those groups, audiences forward? Um, what it's not, I would say, is that it's not prescriptive, right? We know that the work of DEI and B has evolved quite a bit in the last, not only year, but of course 2 years, but even the last year. So what worked maybe 2 years ago or one organization's strategy 3 years ago was thrown out the window over the last several months. So needing to be nimble, to be able to pivot, to be agile, and to really be able to respond to the needs and the expectations of audiences is critically important. We know from our work at Edelman that we do in the trust space that addressing issues like DE&I within an organization and outside are now more important than ever before to employees, to consumers, to grassroots leaders, shareholders, and so on. So for us, it's important that it's a focus of our business. It's a business imperative. It's a good thing to do and a must do. It's also a business imperative. And so it's something for us that is a lighthouse, right? It is a compass and a guide for our continued business success. That was a long answer to your short question, but hopefully helps to give some understanding.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate the context behind it as well, especially as we see companies really talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but it's not enough just to talk about it. You have to define what we mean by diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and then how is that manifesting at your organization? What actions are you rewarding? What are your values? And then being able to pivot, as you were talking about too, looking kind of at the bigger picture of all private employers. And I think the stat is we spend around a third of our lives at least working. What is the responsibility of private employers to really create more equity in the world from your perspective?
Uh, I mean, the requirement, the responsibility is high and significant, right? As I just mentioned, we know that every stakeholder group has added level of expectation and demands upon organizations to do a whole host of things, right? Not only to condemn racism, but also to make sure that they are creating a safe and equitable workspace to ensure that everyone has the same opportunities to advance, to progress. But silence is no longer an option on issues surrounding DEI. And quite candidly, every issue does impact DEI, or DEI has an impact on every issue. So it's applying that lens to everything that the organization is doing and being mindful of that. So the demand is high, the responsibility is great, and silence speaks volumes. So it's saying something, but more importantly, doing something. That you have to walk the talk. You can't just say there's a commitment if there isn't demonstrated action towards achieving what you say you espouse and believe. So For us, that's been what we've been looking at as a private company, and even public companies really being mindful of the expectation, the mandate, and responsibility that business has now more than ever before. We know that business is the most trusted institution of four, including business, media, government, and nonprofits, NGOs. And within that, my employer is the most trusted. And within that trust, there's a higher expectation to maintain and manage that. So that's what I would say to the question about what we're seeing or what is the responsibility of employers to create equity, not only in their workforce again, but within the world.
Within the world, in the community, a plus one to the responsibility is great as well. I think I was just talking to someone the other day where it's a myth that silence is quote unquote neutral. You are taking whatever stand by not speaking with your employees and really talking about things that are impacting your entire workforce. What are some of the other changes you've seen really in the space in terms of clients really prioritizing equity at work, especially over the past 2 or 3 years when the pandemic started?
Sure. So it's interesting, right? What we've seen is this shift to this belief driven employee, where employees, just as in the consumer realm, employees are now more belief driven, right? They want to work for organizations that align with their beliefs and their vision and mission. And so, in addition to our trust barometer, we've also done a special report around belief driven employees. And we found that there really is this newfound contract between employees and employers that requires businesses to take a much more active and ambitious role in society, right? And being and that requires you first being mindful and understanding of your employees' desires, right? So even leaning in more to better understand your workforce, what they care about, what's important to them, the communities that they represent and are part of. So you have to know that first and foremost to then even be able to sort of align. What we found is that 6 in 10 of employees out of 10 employees are making choices based upon their beliefs. 1 in 3 have left their jobs because their employees failed to take a stand on the issues that matter to them most, which include issues surrounding DE&I. We know that when you look at diverse communities, Black and Brown communities, 6 out of 10 Hispanic employees choose their jobs based upon beliefs. So people are not only making those decisions upon where it's based or what the pay is, but does this organization reflect and respond to and demonstrate a focus, care, and concern about the issues that matter to me and my community? And are they actively working towards making a change? So those are some of the things that we've seen. For clients, we've counseled from May 2020 through the end of 2021. We counseled upwards of 400 clients. Ridiculous numbers, right? Of those type of organizations of all sizes, geographies, locations, industries around. Oftentimes it was, in the wake of George Floyd's murder, it was, what do we say, right? And then as part of that, we were like, no, what are you doing? Right? You can't just say something. What are you doing? And so many organizations, it caused them and created the opportunity for them to really pause and reflect on what they were or weren't doing and how to really create strategies, comprehensive strategies that work to address some of the systemic issues within all of our organizations, right, around the globe. And so it was an awakening, right? One, that there are real issues in society and within the organizations. 2, that you're either not doing enough or need to pivot in terms of what you're doing. And 3, that whatever you're doing is really focused on how you can drive the most change, both internally and externally. And that's also another point I would note is this new expectation of outside commitment and influence. It's not only what you're doing inside, and that's critically important. You have to get your house in order, but it's also what you're doing outside the walls of your organization. If you're a consumer retailer, what you're doing outside the brick and mortar. If you are B2B, what you're doing outside. It's every organization.
Yeah, we're having so many conversations around the belief-driven employee and also thinking about communities, thinking about their families as well, the full lives of employees, not just kind of related to their careers as well. More than 60% of employees say it's really important that their companies share in the caring for their families and communities and showing up. How are you seeing from the external lens, external organizations show up for employees and families in a really successful way?
Right. Good question. And I'll first say that there's no one approach. There's no one size fits all to this work. What works for one organization and institution may not work for another. So it's really important about understanding your workforce, again, as I mentioned, and what matters to them and what's going to be most impactful. The commitment is what remains the same. There has to be a commitment to work on active advancement, right, in addressing of those issues. So I will say that some of the things that we've seen that I think have been effective or have been impactful over the last 2 years include even some in the work around issues such as whether it's systemic racism in response to BLM, or even some of the anti-Asian hate activities. You're seeing companies actually partnering with organizations to drive that change. Because while business may be the most trusted employer, and my employer being the most trusted within business, we know that business cannot drive the change alone, right? That it requires partnership with organizations that understand the communities, that have boots on the ground, that are trusted and respected to really drive change. So what we've seen is some very interesting partnerships, sometimes unusual bedfellows that have really helped to, I think, address issues in ways that would not have been pursued or would not have been embarked upon prior to. So unique partnerships that really unify business and nonprofits. I think we're also seeing the shift and seeing organizations get involved in some really interesting social political issues that we've not seen before. So when we talk about Roe v. Wade and overturning of that and other things, where you're seeing business saying, hey, we need to, what can we do for our employees now that this is happening, right? Or as a result, to better serve them. What types of health benefits are we changing? What sorts of policies are we putting in place to make sure that our employees are protected or that they have the support that they need? So that's another example of I think, a difference. I mean, we're having conversations about topics that we would not have addressed in the workplace 5 years ago, even 2.5, 3 years ago. I know even within our organization, we've hosted these powerful conversations amongst our US and global colleagues around issues such as systemic racism, anti-Asian hate, around Roe v. Wade, and having gatherings where we're talking about what it means to our employees and what can we do as a collective community. So those are some of the things that I would point to in terms of changes we've seen with clients, as well as things we've seen within our organization.
Yeah, I definitely agree. You can't take a one size fits all approach to this work.
I would also say goal setting is another big leap that we've seen. Really putting some flags in the ground, some real true commitments on paper. Now, I will say upholding those commitments and making sure that you're monitoring progress on those is the other piece to the puzzle that I think is still something that's in progress. But I mean, how many commitments did we see emerge in the last 2 years? How many publishing of, like, these are the 10 things we're going to do or steps we're going to take have we seen? I would dare say more than the last couple of decades combined in terms of what we've seen in the last 2 years. So I think that's another thing that we're seeing more and more of.
Yeah, goal setting and accountability as well, internally and externally, with your stakeholders, with employees, with investors, with boards of directors. And again, just really taking a personalized approach to this work as well. Can you tell me about how you've redesigned, you and your team have redesigned a system to be more equitable during your time at Edelman, and whether it's a process, policy, or initiative?
Yeah, I think that there's some things we were already doing in terms of policies and different benefits offered in terms of um, you know time needed away, employee resources in terms of, I mean, we've all had to go through some level of trauma over these last 2 years, so providing access to those sorts of services needed to ensure that, because I consider everyone feeling that they have a place, have a home, is necessary to leading towards, equality, right? You need to start there. That's fundamental and foundational to it. So those are some of the things we've been doing. I will also say that our employee network groups, some organizations call them resource groups, affinity groups, whatever you want to call them, business support groups, have been critical for us in trying to share insights, understandings, and create community that help us as we're looking to be equitable across the board. So those groups not only provide a safe space and shared experience for certain members, and you don't have to be a member of the community to be involved. You can have an interest or passion as well. But to be a part of those groups, it also helps us to identify where are their gaps, where are their needs from one community or the other. So those have been key drivers for us in working to redesign a system that is more equitable for our employees. We've also been working really hard to identify ways to stay connected as we've navigated COVID, right, and the other issues. We know that working remotely created another level of inequality that may not have existed prior. So how are we bridging that gap as well? So those are just a few things that we've been doing to sort of address the equality gap that exists, I think, in every organization, right? There are always gaps to bridge.
Absolutely. Always gaps to bridge, always something to be curious about and really thinking about iterating on as well. And I love employee network groups, especially as a former employee network group or ERG leader myself too, really critical communities. Trish, is there anything that I didn't ask throughout our conversation that you want to highlight or any kind of key insights you hope people really take away after hearing our conversation?
I would just say that while my work is focused on DEI and it's my job, that the work of really creating diverse, equitable, inclusive spaces where everyone belongs is the responsibility of every person, right? Every person within an organization. It is not siloed within the HR and people team or here or there, or wherever it may be housed, but it is all of our work day in and day out. And so I would challenge us all to be just more mindful of that and more engaged, and therefore lean in more to take on that responsibility. That we all have a role to play and purpose to serve in it. And our organizations will only continue to transform and change if we embrace that. And so doing that and then holding ourselves and each other accountable. We mentioned accountability and really being mindful of that. Otherwise, we will create these hamster wheel moments or these plans that look great on paper but aren't executed and aren't as effective as they need to be to better serve the needs of our current employees and future employees and even the world in which we live. So that would be it. I would offer a charge to everyone, a charge and a challenge to be actively involved in being a part of the DEI journey within your organization, not only within the walls of where you work, but in the communities in which you live.
That is a great charge to end our conversation, a call to action for folks as well. Trish, thank you so much for being on Reimagining Company Culture this afternoon. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you. Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Of course, and as a reminder for folks who are listening, at AllVoices, we really believe in employees and employers being seen, heard, and understood, and know it's a requirement for the business to really succeed overall. Have a great rest of your afternoon, everyone.